Imagine for a moment that you are in an emergency room, your heart has just stopped, your brain is no longer receiving oxygen, and the doctors are desperately fighting to revive you. According to traditional science, at that moment you should be completely unconscious, with no possibility of forming any memories. But suddenly you find yourselves floating above your own body. You can see the doctors working frantically, hear every word they say, and observe every move they make. And most incredibly, when they wake up, they can describe with absolute accuracy everything that happened while they were clinically dead. This is not science fiction. It's the reality documented by thousands of people who have experienced what we know as near-death experiences. And the evidence I'm going to present to you today could forever change our understanding of the nature of consciousness and what really happens when we die. Stay with me as I reveal the most groundbreaking research ever on human consciousness. Studies that upend our understanding of the brain-mind relationship, and scientific evidence that suggests we are much more than just biological machines destined to disappear. And don't even think about missing the ending, because the conclusions of this research could not only prove that consciousness survives death, but could also radically transform our understanding of what it means to be alive. To understand the magnitude of what we're about to discuss, we need to meet Dr. Pim van Lommel, a Dutch cardiologist who, for more than 10 years, conducted the most extensive study ever done on near-death experiences. His research involved 10 hospitals in the Netherlands, and the results were published in The Lancet, one of the most prestigious medical journals in the world. Van Lommel was not a mystic or a paranormal researcher. He was a traditional cardiologist, trained in the materialist paradigm, who firmly believed that consciousness was simply a product of brain activity. But everything changed when he heard his patients' stories of surviving cardiac arrests. In 1969, as a young intern doctor, Van Lommel was working in one of the first coronary care units in the Netherlands before 1967. All patients who suffered a cardiac arrest used to die, but the new techniques of cardiopulmonary resuscitation and defibrillation were changing that. One day, a 44-year-old patient suffered a cardiac arrest due to a heart attack. After 4 minutes of resuscitation, they managed to get his heart beating again. The medical team was thrilled by the success, but the patient returned very disappointed. He told them about a tunnel, a light, music, and a beautiful landscape that he had experienced while he was dead. Van Lommel remembered the experience but took no action. For years, he was a young doctor beginning his specialty while raising a young family. Only in 1986, after reading Return from Tomorrow by George Ritchie, did he start to wonder if these experiences could be real. Ritchie was a medical student who died of double pneumonia in 1943. His body was covered with a sheet for 9 minutes until a nurse convinced the doctor to inject adrenaline into his heart. When he came back, he described an extraordinary experience that included out-of-body journeys to places located hundreds of miles away. Motivated by this reading, Van Lommel began to ask his patients who had survived cardiac arrests if they remembered anything from the period of unconsciousness. In 2 years, 12 of the 50 surviving patients shared near-death experiences with him. It was then that his scientific curiosity was fully awakened. According to everything he had learned in university, consciousness was a product of brain function during cardiac arrest. There are no bodily reflexes, no brain functions, no breathing. Having memories of an enhanced consciousness, including emotions, cognition, and perceptions outside the body, should be impossible. Until that moment, there were only retrospective studies about these experiences. Skeptics dismissed them as side effects of drugs, hallucinations, dreams, or fantasies. Van Lommel decided it was time to conduct a rigorous prospective study that could provide definitive scientific answers. For 4 years, Van Lommel and his team prospectively studied 344 consecutive survivors of cardiac arrest in 10 Dutch hospitals. They also conducted a longitudinal study interviewing the patients after 2 years and 8 years to document any long-term transformation. The results were revolutionary. Of all the patients, 18% reported near-death experiences, while 82% remembered nothing at all. Van Lommel and his team systematically compared these two groups to find out what could explain the difference. First, they examined the lack of oxygen in the brain, known as anoxia, which had been a favorite explanation among skeptics. However, the data showed that it didn't matter whether the cardiac arrest lasted 3 minutes or 8 minutes. It didn't matter whether the patient had been unconscious for 5 minutes or in a coma for 3 weeks. There was no difference in the severity of anoxia between those who experienced NDEs and those who did not. Then, they examined psychological explanations, such as the fear of death. But most people who suffer a cardiac arrest don't know they're going to have one, so they don't experience fear. When they wake up confused, they ask why so many doctors and nurses are around them. They reviewed the medication given, and there was no difference between those who received medication and those who didn't. Prior knowledge about these experiences didn't make a difference either. Religion didn't matter. Christians, Muslims, atheists, all reported similar experiences. Gender didn't matter. Education didn't matter. They only found two significant factors: age. Younger people had more experiences, and gender. In terms of depth, women reported more elements and deeper experiences. But none of these factors explain the experiences. First, Van Lommel realized that he had ruled out all existing theories. No explanation based on brain function could account for these phenomena. He began to consider the revolutionary idea that consciousness might exist independently of the brain, rather than being its product. What specific evidence led Van Lommel to believe these experiences were real, not just hallucinations? The answer is going to shock you. The most convincing evidence came from so-called veridical perceptions, accurate observations that patients made while they were outside of their bodies. Approximately 45% of people who have near-death experiences report that their consciousness separates from their body, typically floating above it. From that vantage point, they can see events happening to their unconscious or clinically dead body. Below, they observe the frantic efforts of people trying to revive them, hear conversations, notice specific details of the environment, and when they return, they can describe everything with astonishing accuracy. Dr. John Holden conducted a study reviewing all previous literature on near-death experiences that described out-of-body observations. Even when applying very strict criteria, where if even a single tiny aspect of the observations was not real, he would classify it in the unreal category. He found that 92% of these out-of-body observations had no apparent inaccuracies. Van Lommel studied 287 people who had out-of-body observations during their near-death experiences. An impressive 98% of these observations had no apparent inaccuracies, both by their own determination and by the description of the people who had the experience. But the evidence goes further. Dozens of documented cases report out-of-body observations happening far from the physical body, beyond any possible physical perception. One example is a person who had a near-death experience after falling off a horse and hitting his head. Initially, his consciousness was outside his body, seeing his body lying on the ground. Then he saw the horse start to return to the stable, where other people were. His consciousness traveled about a mile away from that vantage point. He saw and heard what people were talking about while his physical body was a mile away. When he recovered from that brush with death, and he asked the people if they had been there, every detail he saw, everything he heard was exactly precise, exactly at the moment when he was literally a mile away on Earth. But the most surprising evidence may come from blind people with near-death experiences. Van Lommel documented cases of people who were blind from birth who, during their experiences, could see for the first time in their lives. When they returned, they were still blind, but they could describe in detail what they had seen during their experience. A notable case involves a man blind since birth. During his near-death experience, he saw his body for the first time. Initially, he was horrified since vision was entirely new to him. When he calmed down, he was able to correlate what he had only known by touch throughout his entire life. Her long hair and a ring that her father had given her. This man claimed to have 360-degree vision, being aware of everything in front, behind, to the sides, above and below him. Technically, spherical vision. He described the light of the sky as something that didn't shine on things, but rather emanated from everything, from the grass, from the trees, from every leaf. The extraordinary thing is that people who are blind from birth don't have visual concepts. They don't dream in images. They've never experienced light as something that feels like love and life. However, during their near-death experiences, they consistently describe these visual phenomena in ways that perfectly match the accounts of sighted people. The neuroscientific evidence is compelling. During cardiac arrest, the heart stops immediately. Blood stops flowing to the brain right away. Between 10 and 20 seconds after the heart stops beating, the electroencephalogram measures the brain's cortical activity, and it becomes completely flat. At that point, it should be impossible to have any kind of memory, much less the lucid and organized recollections of near-death experiences. The body's reflexes disappear, brainstem reflexes are gone, the pupils dilate and don't react to light, and breathing stops. All clinical findings indicate a loss of all brain functions. However, during this state of complete absence of brain activity, people report having the clearest and most enhanced consciousness of their lives. Not only do they maintain their ability to perceive, but they report a much higher level of consciousness than normal, with a perception that goes far beyond the 5 traditional senses. Some skeptics argue that maybe some brain cells remain viable for hours after cardiac arrest, not just minutes as previously thought, and that consciousness could persist. Because of this, Van Lommel explains why this argument doesn't make scientific sense. Waking consciousness like ours requires a functional system for information and energy exchange among all cortical neural centers. What is known as the global neuronal workspace. This is what modern neuroscience requires to experience consciousness. During cardiac arrest, there is no cortical function at all. It's true that some cells can survive for hours after cardiac arrest, especially glial cells, but this doesn't explain the possibility of consciousness at all, because a functional global workspace is needed for that. A surviving living cell doesn't explain consciousness at all, and neurons are very susceptible to oxygen deprivation when blood flow to the arm is blocked for 30 seconds. It doesn't matter when it's released, the muscle cells are still there, but brain cells are extremely susceptible to oxygen deprivation. Another skeptical argument is that maybe the deeper subcortical regions of the brain and the brainstem continue to function, even when the electroencephalogram is flat. Van Lommel also counters this with strong evidence. Studies of induced cardiac arrest in animals showed that no stimulation of the brainstem was possible, which means that the brainstem was not functioning either. Furthermore, from the clinical findings, it is impossible to argue that the brainstem is functioning when there are no brainstem reflexes, when there is no breathing at all, because the respiratory center is near the brainstem. As Van Lommel says, how can you talk about a functioning brainstem when there are no brainstem reflexes? The most dramatic evidence comes from a specific case that Van Lommel personally documented. A man in his 40s was found unconscious in a field by some passers-by. They started some simple chest compressions and called an ambulance. Over 30 minutes after being taken to the hospital, he remained in the ambulance as resuscitation and defibrillation attempts failed. When he arrived at the hospital, his body was cold, blue, like a corpse, not breathing, no circulation, pupils dilated and unresponsive to light. The nurse who saw him first tried to intubate him, inserting a tube to give his lungs extra oxygen. She discovered that he still had dentures in his mouth, so she removed the upper dentures and placed them somewhere on an emergency cart. They worked for an hour and a half before he had blood pressure and circulation again, but he was still on artificial respiration. Intubated and in a deep coma, He was transported to the intensive care unit to continue artificial respiration for a week. He was in a coma for a week. A week later, he returned to the cardiac ward. He had just arrived when the nurse entered to give his medication, saw him and asked, "Do you know where my teeth are?" The nurse was puzzled, and the patient said, "Yes, you know you were there. When I arrived at the hospital, you took out my teeth, put them in that thing covered with all those bottles, and there was a sliding drawer underneath, and that's where you put my teeth." The patient described the resuscitation room from a position outside and above his body, seeing himself and recognizing the nurses and doctors performing cardiopulmonary resuscitation. All of this while he was in a deep coma with no detectable brain activity. This case is not unique. There are more than 200 documented cases of true perceptions that have been corroborated by doctors, nurses, and family members. Regarding the content and timing of these out-of-body experiences, the evidence is overwhelming and consistent. But Van Lommel discovered something even more remarkable: the long-term transformations that people experience after these events. In his longitudinal study, he found dramatic and lasting changes in the values and beliefs of patients who had near-death experiences. The main transformation was the complete absence of fear of death. These people gained a new sense of what mattered in life: empathy, compassion, and love. First towards themselves, accepting their own negative aspects, then empathy and compassion towards others and towards nature. They also developed enhanced intuitive sensitivity. They knew what other people were thinking and feeling. They knew about future events. They knew when someone was going to die, when someone would have cancer. This heightened sensitivity was often problematic for them because they didn't want to have this knowledge. Crucially, Van Lommel found that only patients with near-death experiences had this classic transformation. This provided objective proof of the subjective experience. It could be demonstrated with questionnaires that the transformation had really occurred, linking it directly to the near-death experience, not to meditation, the use of psychedelics, or anything else. Van Lommel came to a groundbreaking conclusion: consciousness is not a product of the brain. Instead, the brain acts as a receiver, like a television that tunes into signals that already exist. Consciousness transcends time and space, existing everywhere, both inside and outside. This analogy is powerful. When you watch television, the program is a product of your television, just like when you use your computer to access the internet. With a billion websites or YouTube videos, is the content a product of your computer? Number? They need a tool to receive the information. The same occurs with consciousness. Right now, there are a billion websites passing through us, through the walls. There are 200,000 to 300,000 phone calls passing through us. They are electromagnetic informational waves, but we need a functional instrument to receive them. The brain has a facilitating function, not a producing one, for experiencing consciousness. It is also a kind of filter. There is a lot of information, but it filters it. It is a transceiver, transmitting information from your body, from your senses to your consciousness, and receiving information from consciousness to your body. When your television is damaged, the program will not be clear or will be lost. When you have brain damage, the function of the brain is impaired, so your waking consciousness will be impaired. When you have Alzheimer's, your waking consciousness is impaired, but your true non-local consciousness remains unharmed, because it is there, in another dimension, without time, without space. This understanding explains many phenomena that materialistic science can't. End-of-life experiences. When dying people have periods of enhanced awareness, terminal lucidity, especially in patients with Alzheimer's. After-death communication experiences, where people have contact with the consciousness of deceased family members. Van Lommel argues that science should expand beyond materialism to include subjective experiences. Materialist science has done a lot of good, but it is not enough for subjective experiences. We need to expand science toward a post-materialist science that includes consciousness as fundamental. The implications of this research are profound. If consciousness is independent of the brain, if it survives the death of the physical body, then everything changes. Our understanding of life, death, purpose, and our relationships with other living beings is completely transformed. As Van Lommel says, when you realize that there is a continuity of consciousness after the death of the body, that consciousness has always been there, before birth and after death, that consciousness is the essence of who we are, then your way of living changes completely. It's not about power, money, cars, looks, youth, or external factors anymore. When you understand that everything is connected, that what you do to others comes back to you, both the positive and the negative things, because everything is connected, then you change the way you treat others, and this improves the world overall. Van Lommel, now 86 years old and having dedicated 37 years to this research, is no longer afraid of death. As he says, "I don't think I'm afraid of death. Maybe people with near-death experiences have 100% absence of fear. I think I have 98% absence of fear. I'm just curious." His final message is clear. It's all about love. Love for yourself, love for others, love for the planet, love for animals. Because we are connected, we are always connected here in this life, and we are connected when we die as well. We are always connected in a realm of non-local consciousness. This research not only challenges the dominant materialist paradigm in science, but also offers a completely new perspective on human nature. It suggests we are spiritual beings experiencing the physical world, not biological machines that mistakenly believe in consciousness. The evidence is overwhelming. Veridical perceptions during the absence of brain activity, vision in people who were blind from birth, profound and lasting transformations, documented cases corroborated by medical staff. Everything points to the same revolutionary conclusion, as Nikola Tesla said. Once science studies non-physical phenomena, it will advance more in a decade than in all previous centuries. Maybe that day has come. Maybe Pan's research, Lommel and other brave scientists who dare to study consciousness beyond the materialist paradigm may be opening a new era in our understanding of reality. The question isn't whether consciousness survives death. Scientific evidence now strongly suggests it does. The question now is, what are we going to do with this information? How will it change how we live, treat others, and view our purpose in the universe? What do you think? Do you think this evidence is enough to prove that we are more than our brains? Or do you think there must be a materialistic explanation that we haven't discovered yet? Share your thoughts below. One thing is certain, we are on the threshold of a revolution in our understanding of consciousness. And if Van Lommel and the thousands of people who have had these experiences are right, then death is not the end of our story, it's just the beginning of a much greater adventure. Perhaps we aren't just biological machines doomed to vanish, but something far more extraordinary than we thought.